Okay, everyone. Hey, we got a little special event today. I know I usually have them on Fridays. Unfortunately, I'm a day late on this one. However, but we got King Crocoduck and Wyatt Mickas. They're back this time together to talk about presuppositional apologetics and philosophy. Yeah, we know Wyatt has tried this multiple times, and he said something about philosophy that kind of piqued Casey's interest. So Casey wanted to arrange this little get together and kind of talk to him about his reasons for believing in God and his philosophy for believing in God and some of his other core beliefs such as presuppositional apologetics and Empiricism. So anyways, hey guys, welcome. Can you guys hear me?
Hey, how you doing, man?
Oh, good.
How's it going?
Works. Awesome. So, and, I'm gonna let Casey start this one because he kind of like instigated this. So Casey, what were some questions you wanted to ask Wyatt, and let Wyatt kind of go with it?
Just generally, what sort of philosophical framework do you have going on, that leads you to believe in God?
What kind of philosophical framework? So the question is, why do I believe in? What's the reason for believing it, or what's some? So the question is, what is the reason why I believe in God, or?
Well, more generally, just want to get a little bit better insight in your ontology, your epistemology.
Okay, sure. Well, my epistemology is you have to start at some axiomatic starting point, and from that starting point, we introduce what's called theorems. So basically, I start off at the axiomatic position. The Bible alone is the word of God written. We can induce that things such as our senses and reasoning are valid. We can also induce the uniformity in nature. So those are some of the things we can induce from the basic presuppositions needed to even get off the ground in epistemology at all. So
this sounds a bit like a Cartesian argument, like in Meditations from First Philosophy. You familiar with that work?
I know a little bit about I thought it was Descartes, not
Yeah, Descartes.
Oh, Descartes.
Yeah.
I know a little bit about Descartes, but not too much.
Yeah, that was approximately his sort of line of reasoning. He began with, I think, therefore I am. From there, he sort of derived, he deduced the existence of a God, and from that he assigned certain properties to this God, and among them benevolence, and in order for this God to be benevolent, his senses have to make sense, and blah, 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 and onward. So that sort of sounds to me like kind of the flavor of the argument you're making.
Mm-hmm. Well,
you use the word induce. Do you mean deduce or?
Yeah, deduce. Yeah, deduce.
Okay.
So basically,
go on.
Yeah. Basically, my apologetic is a little bit of the Clarkian approach to presuppositionalism, not this scientific proving case style, which most of you guys are familiar with. And I try to so any other questions? Do you have?
Yeah, well, when it comes to deduction in general, when it comes to beginning with axioms and following those axioms to their conclusion, does it trouble you at all that the entire process is fundamentally tautological?
In what way?
I mean, when you begin with a set of axioms, which are essentially doing is you're defining a set of terms, and you're then applying a set of rules consistently in order to sort of derive relationships between these definitions. and from there you end up with a sort of a structure of ideas that are built up from this. But ultimately, these things that you build, they reduce to these initial starting points, to these initial definitions. The place where you end is basically the same place where you began, only the formalism is such that you're basically replacing synonyms with other synonyms. You're saying the same thing but in a different way. Does that make sense?
So clarify for me a little bit. Sorry, I didn't have my copy of this.
Oh yeah, I got you. So let's say let me think. Let's say let's take the rules of chess for example. There's a bishop that starts on. Do you play chess?
Yeah, I actually used to, but got away from it.
You know the rules, right?
Yeah, I know the rules a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. Well, a bishop that starts on white is never in the game going to end up on black. We can derive this, quote unquote, derive this. We can sort of deduce this from the fact that bishops move diagonally, and that the spots on the board, they are you have black and white squares, and the black and whites are not next to each other. And that all of the diagonal connections are of the same color. And from all this, what you deduce is that bishops that start on white can only stay on white, or equivalently, bishops that start on white can never end up on black squares. But if you lay this all out formally, what you essentially are saying is the same thing as what you started out with. You start out with these rules of how bishops can move and how the board is arranged, and from that you end up with a statement that is functionally equivalent to what you started out with. The only difference is you've now phrased it differently. And this is the same with every deductive system, whether it's logic or math or any time you start out with a certain rule and consistently, or a set of axioms, a set of assumptions, a set of definitions, and you consistently apply the rules. With language, for example, it's the same deal. There are certain rules in language, and you consistently apply those rules with your initial axioms, I guess we can call them. Your alphabets, your grammatical rules, and whatever. But in the end, it's a sort of a closed system. It doesn't actually say anything about the world of experience. It's entirely self-referential.
So basically, when you're saying that, so basically there's a problem with starting off with a base axiom to get your epistemology from.
Yeah, I think that's a problem.
Okay,
I think if you want to deduce something about the world that is, you can't start out with deduction. You have to use other types of reasoning.
So inductive reasoning. So would you say that science could? So basically, are you talking about from empirical standpoint?
Yeah, I do subscribe to the empiricist epistemology.
Empiricist epistemology. The only thing that could be known is basically the only thing that could be known is by the scientific empiricism.
I would say that the only thing that can be known about the physical world, the world of experience, is empirically. Yeah, is inductively.
Mm-hmm.
And abductively as well. You have to use those two in tandem.
Okay. Would you subscribe to the physical world being all that exists?
I would subscribe to the view that the physical world is all that we're capable. It's all that we're capable of experiencing. I can't disprove that there aren't immaterial worlds, but I could say that they're philosophically insignificant because one way or another they have no effect on our phenomenal experience.
Oh, sure. Well, the question is, do you have to make certain base assumptions to I see myself in Steve's thing, and it's kind of distracting me, so I'm going to go to another screen here. So the question is, would you accept that you have to start off with some base assumptions, reasoning, and subscribing to the laws of logic, such as the law of identity, the law of non-contradiction, the law of excluding middle? These things are required. These assumptions are required for science. So do you have to assume them in order to do science? Would you accept that?
I would say not necessarily. I think it's a very strong claim to say that we have to subscribe to certain deductive principles in order to be able to do science. What comes to mind is something that comes from mathematics. You're probably familiar with it. It's the axiom of multiplicative commutativity. That's a fancy way of saying that A times B equals B times A. You're familiar with that, yeah?
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. So like you multiply two numbers, 2 times 3, it's equal to 3 times 2, right? That's multiplicative commutativity. It doesn't matter what order you multiply in, you get the same result. But there are situations, for example, with operators where that doesn't apply, where B times A does not equal A times B. Where you have to suspend this fundamental assumption that everybody sort of just takes for granted, and this has real world effects. I'm thinking of in quantum mechanics. Maybe you've heard of the uncertainty principle.
No, I have not. I haven't studied much into quantum mechanics, man.
Yeah. No, that's okay. That's completely okay. Yeah, most people don't. But it's sort of the cornerstone of quantum mechanics, and it sort of leads to certain consequences about the nature of the universe at the smallest scales. There are things we can verify, like electrons having wave behavior and particle behavior, even though these behaviors are mutually exclusive. And these things emerge only because of the failure of A times B to equal B times A. You only derive this principle once you suspend this assumption of multiplicative commutativity. So I would say that in terms of, I would say that there aren't any particular laws of logic or any particular mathematical laws that are fundamentally necessary in order for the universe to function. I would say that instead these things are descriptions that we use. They're basically language games that we play in order to describe our observations and articulate to each other in order to communicate what we expect to observe, which is entirely the point of science. Our goal is to try to predict future data, and we want to do that as accurately as possible, and math and logic are good frameworks for doing that because they're very precise. They allow us to sort of zero in on things in ways that ordinary grammar-based language can't do. And oftentimes we have to, it's not just this multiplicative commutativity thing for the uncertainty principle. That's just one case of where we suspend an assumption that we hold dear. There are other cases as well. With general relativity, we have to abandon Euclidean geometry and go instead toward a geometry where it's possible for parallel lines to actually converge. These initial axioms, they're closed systems. They're languages. They're good at describing things. They're good at us articulating descriptions of things. But sometimes the real world can't be spoken in certain languages, and so we have to use other languages. You see where I'm getting?
Sure. So you're saying that we don't have to have these. So we don't have to have the assumptions that our senses and reasoning are valid in order to know anything in science at all, or know anything that science can teach us, right?
I agree. I don't think it's necessary to have what's called sense data foundationalism in order for us to do science. We could be plugged into the matrix. It could be that everything we're experiencing is a delusion. Mm-hmm. But as long as we're applying inductive reasoning, as long as we say tentatively that our observations are internally consistent, that we weren't created 5 minutes ago with false memories, and that the universe behaves consistently, this is what you need in order to do science. But these aren't logically necessary principles. These are principles we sort of just take for granted. You're probably familiar with the problem of induction.
Right, the problem of induction. Yeah, I'm familiar with that. So the assumption that the present will be like the past.
What's up?
The assumption that the present would be like the past.
Yeah.
So,
I would say though that's not a logical assumption. This is a different sphere of reasoning. When we're talking about logical assumptions, we're talking about deduction, which I say is problematic because it's tautological. The problem of induction is defined with inductions. It's circular. There's a problem with induction, and there's a problem with abduction as well, in that there's a danger of affirming the consequent. What I'm trying to say is there's no mode of reasoning that's perfectly, free from any kind of flaw. But that only one of these modes of reasoning is capable of giving us reliable information about the physical world.
So the next question I have is, since you said you are an empiricist, would you subscribe to science dealing with what's quote unquote true, or what works?
Well, I think it depends on what we mean by true. When we're talking about things that works, that sounds like a sort of correspondence theory of truth, which I don't hold to. I hold to the epistemic theory of truth. I have a certain truth assignment function. And basically what it amounts to is, if I have a model that can accurately predict future data, then it has a higher truth value than models which fail to do that.
So basically, a model works better than a model that is accurate of making the predictions necessary are better than the models that fail, right?
Yeah, and both the ones that are successful and the ones that fail, are better than models that are unfalsifiable. That is, models that even that no matter what, under any circumstance, there's no way you can say that it's wrong, even in principle.
So is that based on the probability, or is that based more on probabilistic truth, or absolute truth?
What do you mean? Well, how do you distinguish between the two?
Basically, something that's probably true, because I subscribe to science, anything for certain about the actual world that we live in. That they lend credence more to probabilities.
I see. So what I'll say is that science, indeed any observation, can never be maximally precise. Any measurement that you make is always going to have some error to it. There's an intrinsic error in every possible measurement you can make that by itself will prevent you from getting a 100% truth value. But whatchamacallit? I would say that one of the goals of science is to approach truth asymptotically. We can never reach it, but we can get infinitely close as time goes to infinity. By the way, is the background noise bothering you at all, or?
There's no background noise.
I hear nothing on your end.
I don't hear any background noise with you.
Okay.
But so the question is, how do you know how close you are with science? You can't.
we see how closely our predictions come to our models. Our models are idealizations. You know, when you're talking about, for instance, in classical physics, there's a problem of a mass sliding down a wedge, and you make all of these assumptions. The wedge and the mass are both completely frictionless. There's absolutely no air at all. There's it's inside of a vacuum. The angles are perfect. These are perfectly rigid bodies. Gravity is acting perfectly uniformly. You make all of these idealizations in the model because if you were to put in all of the variables, you end up with a really nasty mess. But with the idealization, you can make a sort of a decent kind of equation that you can actually work with in real life. And then when you actually go out and you test it, you can start adding on variables one by one. But when you try to even test the ideal situation, it's still going to be off by a little bit. But it'll be close enough for you to be able to use statistical methods to determine how closely it's approximated to your model.
Okay. So basically, if it works and continues to work.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you can get infinitely close, but you can't get to absolute truth.
Right. The thing we're calling absolute truth, I'm taking this to mean absolutely precise. I would say that it's probably not necessary in order to develop an accurate view of reality. But even if it were possible, even in principle, I would say that nothing could come closer than science in order to be able to do this.
I would actually agree with that. I would actually agree with that statement that science does not work in the realm of absolute truth. But I basically get annoyed by a little bit of the Facebook internet atheist crowd because they're so loose with their language. Have you seen that?
I've seen that on all sides. People.
Yeah.
If professional philosophers were to look at us right now, they'd probably be throwing up at our own thing. They'll probably look at us the way we look at Facebook arguments.
Yeah.
And then some advanced alien race will be looking at those advanced philosophers in the same way they'll be looking at a debate between William Lane Craig and Sean Carroll, and they're going to be throwing up at these amateurs on the stage, compared to these amazing aliens and their super intelligence, whatever. Oh, yeah, what is it that annoys you?
One of the things they bring up is that, and this is one of the things that PZ and I talked about, was the term fact. When people say that evolution is a fact, which we have to both define what evolution actually is, because remember when Fiona said that evolution is both a fact and a theory. So this has been actually pretty useful for me. That people are actually, that science doesn't work with quote unquote facts, right? Or quote unquote truth statements. They work on probabilities, unless you are willing to get into the realm of affirming the consequent.
Well, I think we're going to have to differ on our definition of fact. When I use the word fact, and I think the way that people, atheists on the internet, are using the word fact when referring to evolution, I think the grammatically correct way of stating what it is they're trying to say is, it is a fact that evolution takes place. It is a fact that evolution has occurred. Evolution itself is an entire network of facts. And I define a fact as a unit of information that anyone can independently verify.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say there is such a thing as a fossil with features A, B, and C. If I make the statement fossil X has features A, B, and C, that itself is a fact. That doesn't tell us anything about evolution by itself. But then you combine this fact with other facts like features A, B, and C are intermediates between fossils W and fossil Y, which has these other features. And they are intermediates in accordance with definitions so and so. Where we're trying to communicate, so we have to come up with definitions to describe what it is we're talking about. Even though the things we're talking about themselves are not definitional, they're not rooted in any kind of absolute deductive framework. And using all of this, we make the induction that fossil X is an intermediate between fossil W and fossil Y because of the features. But at every point, you're dealing with different units of information, and these units of information, these facts, create a network, and you take that as a whole, and that is the theory of evolution.
Okay. I'm out there for the last couple of seconds, but
I cut out?
No, I think you cut out, Wyatt. He's just basically saying that the scientific theory of evolution is a collection of facts. Evolution itself, it's a shorthand when somebody says evolution is a fact, they're just saying shorthandedly that it is observed. Just like we say gravity is a fact, it is observed. We observe gravity, right? Even though it's kind of a misnomer because you can't have a noun as a fact, right? You don't say something like TV is fact, chair is fact. But what King was saying was that a fact is a discrete piece of information, and then the theory is a collection of them. So when they say evolution is fact, this means we observe it and we know that it does happen. Does that make sense, Wyatt? Because I think you cut out there.
Yeah.
I would say that also I want to stress that fact doesn't really have anything to do with truth value. When I think of truth values, I'm thinking of an assignment that we make to a proposition that we put into our truth assignment functions, right? Somebody makes a proposition P. We have our epistemology, which gives us a truth assignment function F. F of P yields a truth value that, it can range, it depends on how you assign your values, but I would say fact is not in that family of that family of statements.
So since I've been asking you a bunch of questions, do you want to turn it around on me? Ask me a bunch of questions here?
I mean, do you have any more objections or on this particular line? Because I want to make sure you're okay with this definition of fact that I put out.
Yeah, I'll let you define your terms a little bit. Yeah. So.
Okay.
So, but questions for me and my worldview?
How do you move from your internal deductive framework of, you define these axioms, you have a set of rules that you consistently apply. How do you take that and apply it to the world of experience? How do you begin with your initial assumptions and from those derive your models of reality?
All right. So when I said that I take the proposition that the Bible alone is the Word of God, and from that I could deduce that my senses and reasoning are valid. For example, that means that I have correct good axiom or good presuppositions, a good foundation to start with to a inquiry of the world. So that's how I could get from that foundation to actually examining the world around me.
But what steps do you take to get from the Bible is accurate to we can rely on our senses and reason? Because I don't remember reading in the Bible anything about how like human beings have been imbued with reason and senses.
Well, got too many notes here. I hate. Okay. This is good enough, I guess. I should have asked you. I should have asked you beforehand. What kind of relevant videos that you produced get me into this conversation?
What kind of videos do I produce?
Yeah, what kind of relevant videos that you produced relevant to the subject?
Well, I mainly made anti-creationism videos. I've recently started bridging into other kinds of things I consider pseudoscience. I've also done videos, not so well executed, a little bit philosophically naive, arguing against the existence of God. That was in the early days. Mostly, it's just been scientific arguments against creationism.
Okay, good. So from like verses in the Bible, such as 2:13 and 1 John 2:21, God does not deny himself, and no lie is the truth, is an affirmation of certain principles of the laws of logic.
Could you read me the verses?
Sure. Do the hard work of actually opening the pages and finding them. But
yeah, sorry, I don't have my Bible here. I do have a Quran, but wrong book.
Oh, the Quran is a little bit of the Quran, but
I also have this big ass Talmud lying in the corner.
Yeah. So.
While you're looking for that, Wyatt, hey, so we don't have dead air. Hey, King, would you say that it's safe to say, even though I agree 100,000% that we don't have Cartesian certainty in anything, right? I mean, we just can't. But is it perfectly fine to say, if within the framework of something we're working with, for example, if I'm saying in the realm of cosmology, that it's a fact that the sun's a star, right? Something very basic like that. When we're talking about a fact that we know for certitude, we're framing it in such a way we're saying that within the confines of this particular discipline of science, we know this to be true. We're not extending it outside the matrix or whatever, weird brain in a vat kind of thing. Would you say it's perfectly fine to say, for a fact, within science or within a specific discipline, we know something to be true?
I guess, yeah, if we're using this sort of tentative definition of truth, but when we're talking to apologetics, they normally mean truth.
Correct.
They're thinking of it in terms of propositional logic, where you have a proposition and you assign the value t. How
about just stating as a fact, though? I mean, if I say that the stars, the sun's a star is a fact. Again, that may not be a fact if we're living in the matrix or something, but as far as we understand within the discipline of what we're talking about, that's when we say something is a fact. Now, again, I understand when presuppositions start talking about truth values, they're not meaning in the same way as assigning to a propositional statement. So it gets a little hairy there, because we've had this discussions with Wyatt before, and when I say something to be true, I'm not using it in the propositionally that way. I'm not saying that, I'm assigning something a truth value. And so I think that's gets confusing between the truth value and what could we call a fact. Would you agree?
Yeah, we have to all be on the same page when it comes to the type of reasoning we're using. Are we using induction or deduction at the time that the word truth is uttered? If we're using deduction, then we do say something is 100% true. If we're using induction, then it's in the scientific sense. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so I got this verse, and the thing is, at the last part of the verse, he cannot deny himself. It's talking about Christ here, and so he cannot deny himself. That's basically affirming the law of identity.
Is it really?
Yeah, it's well, he cannot deny himself. That means that his yeah. So a little bit of affirmation of the law of identity, although it's not stated by name. Like I said, humans have names, but given these names, but Scripture does allow us to deduce, affirmations. So what these laws of logic.
So what it's suggesting is God cannot contradict himself. That verse, yeah.
So. Yeah, God cannot contradict himself. Basically.
But what does this say about the nature of reality? What is this as a metaphysical principle? Because this seems to apply only to God. It doesn't seem to be generalized to everything else.
Well, since God created the universe, He created the universe to behave in a logically consistent fashion. So God Himself is the pinnacle of logic, according to scriptures.
But there's a problem, though. God is also, we're told, the pinnacle of good, and the universe, and certain aspects of it, by the account of the Christian worldview, are evil. So there are attributes of God. You can't really say that the universe is a reflection of God's own attributes, since it contains attributes that contradict God's own nature, like evil.
So you're talking about you're getting close to the problem of evil objection, aren't you?
No. I'm not going in that direction. What I'm saying is, because what you seem to be saying is that God's nature is that He is inherently logical. This verse says that God subscribes to the law of non-contradiction. And since the universe, this is what I'm understanding your argument as, since the universe is a sort of reflection of God's nature, the universe also must subscribe to the law of non-contradiction.
Right.
I'm saying there's a problem. I'm saying there's a problem there, because we're also God. Let's grant for a moment God exists. All of this is true, and that God is the pinnacle of good.
Okay.
The universe is not a reflection of this aspect of God's nature, right? We have a contradiction here. We have the universe is a reflection of God's inherent logical God's subscription to the law of non-contradiction, and we have the universe is a reflection of God's goodness. But the second one doesn't really jive.
Well, the question then I would have for you is define what good is.
No. This isn't on my account. I'm saying this is on your account. What you're saying. Okay, we have this entity God, right? And God has certain properties.
Right. If you're going to make the objection, that there's things in this world that contradicts God's pinnacle, then I'm going to have to ask you to define your terms here.
Well, maybe it'll help if I put it more abstractly. I have an entity we're calling God, right?
Right.
God has let's give God two attributes. We'll give him attribute X and attribute Y. Yeah. Next, we have another entity. We have the universe. The universe is a sort of a projection, or at least a reflection of God, and it contains certain entities. It contains certain attributes, and the attributes that it contains are the same as the attributes of God. So if God has attributes X and Y, the universe also has attributes X and Y, right?
Yeah, sure.
So let's say we have attribute X, both God has it and the universe has it. And let's say we have attribute Y, both God has it and God has attribute Y, but the universe does not have attribute Y. What can we say then about this general rule that whatever attributes God has, the universe also has?
Well, God created the universe according to his own purposes.
Right, but if we're the proposition seems to be that whatever attributes God has, attributes X and Y, the universe also has those attributes. Right? You were saying these verses this show that God subscribes to the law of non-contradiction, and then you said because God created the universe, and the universe is sort of the universe also has the law of non-contradiction. That's attribute X. But then we have attribute Y. And we see that this rule of whatever property God has, the universe also has to have, doesn't necessarily apply. I'm taking Y to be good. God is good, but there are elements of the universe that, not according to my own view, but according to the Christian worldview, things like adultery and murder, and, well, I think that's evil too, but that's beside the point. The point I'm trying to make is, by the Christian worldview, I don't think it's consistent to say that whatever properties God has, the universe also intrinsically has. So I don't think that you can derive the law of non-contradiction by saying...
Well, I would disagree because, as you may know, that I'm a Calvinist.
Okay.
Like adultery or fornication only go against what's called God's prescriptive will. They can't go against God's decretive will because God is sovereign over all things, and all things work together for good for him. So I don't think that there's anything that goes against God's decree of good in the universe at all.
When we're talking about things that exist, though, when we're talking about properties of the universe, one of the properties is that it contains things that, according to the Christian worldview, are evil, right?
According to the Christian worldview, go against God's descriptive, prescriptive will, but that there's anything that's gratuitous evil or useless evil, we don't say there's a such thing.
Okay, but you still say that there is the universe does have a property Y, and that this property is it contains evil.
Right.
So then how can we say that God, who has property, we'll call it Y prime, God has no evil? How can we say that God's nature is reflected onto the universe as a general principle? Because remember, the way we started this out was there are verses that suggest that God subscribes to the law of non-contradiction, and that this can be generalized to the universe as a whole because God created the universe, and the universe reflects God's nature. Example of the universe not reflecting God's nature. So if we have this counterexample of Y not equaling Y prime, then how can we say that X, the universe apparently subscribing to the laws of logic, is equal to X prime, God's subscription to the laws of logic? I think that the existence of this counterexample of Y not equaling to Y prime disproves this general rule of, whatever God is, the universe reflects. Like, are you seeing where I'm coming from?
Yeah, I see where you're coming from, and I see where that an adequate objection. I might not have an answer for that at this point, but
that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add, in philosophy, whenever an argument is unanswered, or whenever an argument is taken down, that's seldom the end of the conversation. That's just a license for the person to go back and refine it, and then make it stronger and come back next time. So I just want to express that I don't view this as a confrontational kind of thing. I think we're trying to work together to arrive at some kind of greater truth. If that makes any sense.
Sure. How long do you want this to go? Because there's some people in the how much longer do you want this to go?
However long you're comfortable.
Yeah, completely up to you guys. I mean, we have a lot of people in here that I'm sure want to ask you some questions, Wyatt. Because again, this is like the 8th or 9th time, at least, probably we've had talks on presuppositionalism. I just probably kind of like to know, where do you stand as far as where you think this presuppositional argumentation is heading? When you listen to like King Crocoduck talk, I mean, he makes some very, very wonderful, valid points. Do any of these actually, do you take on board and go, you know what? Maybe my viewing of this isn't really the best position to be taken off from, right? For example, like we have General here, who's a Christian as well. He doesn't go by presuppositional argumentation, right? He goes from a very different standpoint. Do you do a comparison contrast between like how you do the presuppositional argumentation, and yet General doesn't? And a lot of the atheists and the non-theists have a lot of respect for General. We do listen to him. He knows the Bible very well. So I'm just curious, do you take any of this on board?
Well, I take a little bit of this on board, but here's the thing. There's a lot of, like I said, I'm a little bit of unresearched research in a lot of this stuff, but I've been self-taught for. There's a lot to learn within the realms of presuppositionalists that I do not know. But
so you think that it's still a valid form of argumentation?
Well, argumentation and position is when you talk about argument, when you talk about an argument versus position, I take the presuppositionalist position. I affirm that the Bible alone is the Word of God written, but I do not first axiom as the axiomatic starting point for my position. The way we could put that into an argument, to take that to an atheist, is a totally different position.
Well, for example, I'm not an atheist, but I don't need presuppositional apologetics to start my epistemological framework, right? I am fine with taking some axiomatic assumptions. I have no problem with saying the universe does exist and take it just, you may call it a brute fact, but I tend to avoid saying brute fact, but I take it axiomatically because I can't even begin to interpret anything else until I have that first assumption, right? So when you're looking at the Bible, how are you able to even evaluate the Bible if you haven't even formulated that you exist yet, that the universe exists? How do you even say, oh, well, the Bible is now my foundation for my presuppositional apologetics, when I haven't even made the assumption that I'm existing or the universe exists?
Well, like I said, we get implications. What are the implications of the Bible alone being the Word of God? First of all, that the universe exists. Second of all, that God exists.
Okay, so you do assume that the universe exists, right? Assumption number one, you assume that, right?
I assume that the universe exists as an implication that Word of God.
But I assume the universe exists without God. Go ahead, King.
Sorry, really quickly. How do you know that the Bible exists?
That's my axiom.
No, I'm not asking how do you know the Bible is. I'm not asking how you know the Bible is true.
Yeah.
I'm asking how do you know that the actual physical book or the word itself is actually something that has its own existence.
Well, that would be an implication. If the Bible didn't exist, then the Bible could not be true, right?
Right. So that's exactly correct. So you have to, before you can say that the Bible is true, you have to establish that it exists. How do you do that?
I would say that's part of the axiom. This thing called the Bible is true.
Wait, hold on. That doesn't make any sense. If you can't say the Bible is true before you admit that the Bible exists.
It's a little circular.
Yeah.
You see the circularity there?
Well, we can get on the circularity thing another time, and I could grow you on that.
Wait, can I just jump in on this? And as a Christian, I can tell Wyatt what you guys are saying.
Sure.
Wait,
Yep. Okay. So Wyatt, do you have a Bible with you right now in the room?
Yeah.
Like physically?
Yeah, physically.
Yeah. Okay. So show it on the camera. Okay. Now you're physically touching that book,
right?
And in physics, we can go down, and also chemistry, we can go down right to the atomic scale. Is that book? Are you using presuppositional apologetics to establish the existence of that book?
I'm using presuppositional apologetics to establish that the contents in the book are true. Not the commentaries, but
we're not going there yet. So, can you use presuppositional apologetics to establish the existence of that book that's in your hand?
The existence, not the validity of its content.
Yeah.
I would say that the implication that this book is true is the distance of it.
Can I offer a counterexample?
Yes, please.
Okay. If I said that let's say I define parallel lines in a Euclidean space, just ordinary parallel lines as people generally imagine them, and I define these lines as infinitely long, and they never touch, they never come in contact, they have the same slope. Is it true for me to say that, is it 100% axiomatically true for me to say that these parallel lines will never touch?
100% axiomatically true? Yes.
Okay. Does that fact imply that such an entity actually exists? That if I look somewhere in the universe, I'm actually going to find two parallel lines that will never intersect?
Well,
that depends on your point of view and your framework. So if you're on one of those lines, how do you know the other line exists?
Exactly.
It can apply that two parallel lines could exist, but we know that they don't in a non-Euclidean universe, right? Correct?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. This is just simple linear algebra. So.
Yeah. By definition, no two parallel lines cannot touch.
Yeah. Well, in Euclidean space, yeah. But okay, let me try a different example. Let's say I'm going to make a syllogism right now. Premise 1: Daleks hate Time Lords. Premise 2: the Doctor is a Time Lord. Conclusion: Daleks hate the Doctor. Is this syllogism true? Is there 100%? Is there truth? Is it a valid syllogism? Is what I'm asking.
It's valid, and it's valid and it's sound.
Okay, but does the fact that it's true, that is, the syllogism is consistent, it's valid, it's 100%, does this imply that anywhere in the universe we search, we're going to find a Dalek or a Time Lord?
Well, it depends on what you mean. Depends on what do you mean by where it exists.
Do Time Lords actually
If
exist in
it's-
reality? I wish they did. My favorite show, but why? But do Daleks and Time Lords actually exist anywhere in the universe? Does it mean that they exist somewhere?
They don't exist in the actual. They don't exist in the actual reality. They exist in the
Conceptually.
yeah. They exist conceptually. Not yeah. They exist conceptually.
Okay, but even though they're conceptual, I can make statements about them that are true, like that syllogism, right?
Right.
So since the truth of the syllogism does not necessarily imply the actual existence, the physical manifestation of Time Lords and Daleks, how could we say that the truth of the Bible implies the existence of the physical Bible itself?
Well, because the physical Bible itself, well, the conception of, well, the physical Bible itself, what was written down. I'm talking about the conceptual Bible, about the conception of the Bible even existing. But,
No, it doesn't
I'm
make
not
sense.
sure what you mean by that. I mean, it
Yes.
sounds like you're doing a reification fallacy. What he's saying was basically that this stuff can be true, and you're just making it true, which is a type of reification, right? So again, what makes the physical Bible? What makes it in the physical Bible? What makes the Bible true? And first of all, first you never even answered how the Bible exists. How do you know it exists? But how are you actually saying that what's actually in the Bible is true, even though you can make truth statements about what's in it? Just because you make truth statements about what's in it doesn't make what's in it true.
well, like
correct?
I said, that's where I'm starting from. If I can't start from the axiomatic position that the Bible alone is the Word of God, then I can reject your axiomatic positions too, or your
Well, we have the same axiomatic
positions
position.
too.
We both agree that the universe exists. I think everybody here thinks the universe exists.
Yeah.
I don't need the Bible to do that, right? How are you adding the Bible to do that any better than my axiom where I don't have to use the Bible to do that? You see
The
what I'm
universe.
saying?
Well, the question is, how do you know that the universe exists? Because
That's
I
assumed.
already said,
It's
We don't.
assumed.
We don't. It's an axiom.
Just like you said, you accept it as an axiom as well, do you not, Wyatt? You said I accept the universe exists as an
I don't
axiom.
accept that myself. I say it's implication of my initial axiom. So, how do you know that the universe exists? Since you're rejecting my axiom, then I can just reject yours. If we're going to be logically consistent in this conversation.
But we don't. Neither of us did say that we know the universe exists. We accepted it as an axiom.
Right. Exactly. Remember I was saying that I build my epistemological framework with the assumption that the universe exists. Okay, I can't know that with Cartesian certitude. There's no possible way. Just like I can't know nestlings even exist, right? I mean, I just assume external minds exist. But I'm fine with that. I don't need the Bible to tell me that I'm talking to other people. And I think the question again is, why do you have to add something to that foundation that's not needed? Because you're just now adding more axioms. In the law of parsimony, basically, you don't have as many. You don't need. You try to avoid having multiple axioms, right? The minimum amount of set of axioms you go for. If you have two competing theories, usually, but in this particular case, if we have two competing axioms or two competing worldviews, if my worldviews has less axioms and just build the same framework, isn't that a better position?
Actually, it doesn't have less axioms. I only start with one, and then we build off questions.
Which is your basic axiom though? God exists or the universe exists? Which one do you start with? Your properly basic belief.
I start.
The Bible.
I start. Yeah, I just said it. The Bible is the Word of God written. That's my axiom.
Well, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Do you remember when you first opened a Bible or hold a Bible?
I don't remember. I was too young.
But you do accept that you at one point you first opened a Bible, at least in your life, at one point.
Yes, at one point I did.
Okay, so before that moment, you didn't know the Bible existed, or you didn't know what the Bible said.
Right.
Right.
So how'd you evaluate it if you didn't know what it was? You couldn't take it as an axiom at that point because you didn't know it existed.
Yeah.
Because I was too young to evaluate anything at that.
But that's, again, you can't take it as an axiom if you don't know it existed, right? You can't say, I accept the Bible to be true axiomatically if you had no idea what it was. You couldn't use that axiom to evaluate what's the content of it, or even its physical existence.
The same objection could go to you before you knew what the universe is. How do you assume that the universe existed in the first place?
That's why.
What fallacy is that, Steve?
What's what? I'm sorry.
The same.
What?
The same
circular.
The same.
No. If you we ask the same question back to the one that first asked the question to. So we ask you from how do you know the Bible exists, but you immediately jump towards so how do you know the universe exists? But that doesn't answer the question that we are trying to ask you.
The same objection I'm trying to point out. The same objection goes to you.
No, it can't. We say
you're answering a question with a question.
Yes, but that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. You avoid the question by trying to revert it back to us, and that is a fallacy.
If you're going to make are you going to be logically consistent with making your objections, or are you just going to make objections and not be logically
Well, his
consistent?
objection is valid. We asked you a question, and you asked us a question back. So the question, once again, and I'm sure Casey wants to join back in here. Sorry, Casey. Again, before you even knew anything about the Bible, you didn't know it existed, you didn't know what it was, how did you evaluate the Bible to be true or that it even existed based upon what axiom at that point did you have? Because you couldn't have used the Bible as an axiom that's true because you haven't even looked at it yet. You haven't even read it. You didn't know what it was. You have it in your hands. You say, I have a book in my hands. What axiom did you use to determine that book physically was in your hands and the content was valid in this side?
And I also have to point out I think you believe that you yourself existed before you ever hold a Bible in your hands, and I think you believe that books existed before you ever hold the Bible in your hands. So you already accepted things before you ever hold a Bible. Right. Ever.
Do you see that your axiom?
Your axiom doesn't work. Your axiom doesn't work.
Maybe it'll help if I illustrate.
Go ahead. Go ahead, King. Because you know where we're going with this, but go ahead.
Well, maybe a reductio ad absurdum would be helpful. Let's say I started with the axiom that Daleks exist. The Daleks manifest. In themselves in real life. From this axiom, I can deduce that since Daleks have a physical manifestation, well, that means that they occupy space. And moreover, since Daleks are characterized in part by a certain set of behaviors, and since behaviors don't make sense unless you have, outside of the context of time, they also exist in time as well, which means that existence contains both space and time, and all of this I derive by assuming the existence of Daleks. Does this mean that Daleks exist?
Okay, can you repeat the thing?
So I'm going to start with the axiom that Daleks are real. A Dalek we are defining as, you know what they look like, right?
I know what they look like. I watched Doctor Who a couple times.
Okay, and so we define them as things that look like that, and also that's the property X, and then we're also going to give them property Y. They have an insatiable desire to go on genocidal rampages. So property X, that Daleks look the way they do, only makes sense if they occupy space. So the existence of a Dalek implies the existence of space. Moreover, property Y, that they have a tendency to go on genocidal rampages implies the existence of time, since it's impossible to go on a genocidal rampage unless the time is passing. There has to be a point in which the genocide has not taken place, and then there has to be a subsequent point in time when the genocide has taken place. So starting with this axiom that there exists such a thing as Dalek, it has these two properties, X and Y, I have derived the existence of space and time. And I could go on, and I could also probably derive laws of logic and so on. Let's say I did all of that. Does this mean that I'm justified in believing in the existence of Daleks?
Just real quick a bit, I found the fallacy I was using. It's called question dodging. And one form of this fallacy is answering the question with another question. So just to point it out.
So I'm asking you if you're being logically consistent with your questions, because the same objection could go for you.
That is the fallacy.
Hang on, honestly, I don't think Wyatt's really understanding what Casey's trying to point out.
That's a fallacy. That's also called the fallacy.
No, I'm not saying that you are wrong by using a fallacy. I'm pointing out the fallacy, and that is not a fallacy.
Yeah, question dodging is a lot of different things, one of which is asking a question in response to a question. But again, I want to stick with what Casey's running on Wyatt, the reductor ad absurdum, because he's got a brilliant point here.
I'm sorry.
That's fine. That's a big deal. But he can build his whole framework. His whole epistemological framework could be built upon Doctor Who mythology, and that Daleks and Doctor Who is correct. Exist, right? I mean, he could build a whole framework on this, but that doesn't mean that they do exist. Do you agree upon that? Do you see where he's going with that? Can you agree he could build space, time?
How does he? Well, he could probably build his epistemology on space and time, but I don't see how he could get the law.
He's building it on the Daleks' existence. He's building it upon that. And from there, because Daleks exterminate people, which takes time to do, they travel through space. So you could probably pretty much build all of reality centered around that axiom that Daleks exist. Is that what you're trying to do, Casey?
Yeah.
Okay. But that doesn't mean Daleks do exist, right? That's where he's going with this, Wyatt. Do you see the same thing you're doing with your Christian deity? That you're building a whole framework around it. That doesn't mean that deity does exist. It's the same thing. It's analogous.
And just replacing the Bible with Dalek.
Or the Bible.
Right.
Same thing.
Yeah.
Either or. God, Bible. You can insert anything there.
No. The statement, the Bible is to replacing with the statement Daleks exists.
Yeah, can I just jump in on this? I think this conversation is going in circles because that object from Doctor Who, I gather, is that the object that you're talking about?
Yeah, what, you're not a Whovian? You're not a Whovian? How'd you get in here? Just kidding. Really, you're not a Whovian? I thought we're all Whovians. That's okay.
Anyway,
the principle's the same. You could use anything there.
That is a fictitious thing versus the fact that the Bible physically is there. The contents on the pages of the Bible are
right, but
the
Bible physically exists, but doesn't mean the content is correct. Again, he's saying that he's building his entire epistemological framework around the Bible, which again he never got back to us on how could you do that before you even know what the Bible is. That makes no sense to say my axiom is that the Bible is correct in everything, and therefore I'm building my worldview on that. If I don't even know what the book is yet, you have to have some axiom prior to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I was building off here, this is what my line of reasoning was. What Wyatt seemed to be saying was that he accepted the content of the Bible.
The content, right?
Yeah, and that the content of the Bible allows him to derive the existence of the physical Bible itself.
Yeah.
So what I'm thinking is if I invent this, or not invent, but appropriate this content of the Dalek, right? I start with this axiom. Then, using the same kind of reasoning, I can derive the existence of the Dalek.
I think it'd be a better analogy if you said actually like a Doctor Who script, right? because the content of the script would be similar to the content of the Bible. Just
yeah. Daleks are more fun though.
Oh, well, I have maybe a question for everyone or anyone here. If you made the axiom the universe exists, don't you have to have some basis of what it means to be or to exist?
well, personally, I take the universe as everything. When I mean the universe exists,
reality.
I mean reality as a whole. Now, other people can define it differently, and I'm fine with that, right? I make it very clear when I'm talking about the universe, I'm not talking about just cosmological terms. I am talking the universe as the set of all things.
Yeah,
that's just me. I don't know how you guys do.
Paul in the side chat has laid it out quite nicely. A physical Doctor Who DVD equals physical Bible, in the sense of you have a physical thing, a disc that has contents on it that the DVD player decodes to then give you this fictitious, story. The question is it fictitious? Well, we know how Doctor Who was made. It was penned by authors.
It was the Bible.
Tell you.
So it was the Bible.
By a lot of different authors.
But then that's where I think Wyatt would come back and then ask you guys to then establish the fictitious nature of the Bible.
We know that many of the legends in the Bible were adopted from previous mythology, like.
No, they weren't.
Yeah, they were.
Okay,
yeah, but then again, even if you have an overlap of ancient Near Eastern cosmologies with the text, the point is that you need to establish that this was nothing but the imaginations of the ancient Near Eastern folk. And then I would go beyond that and say that Genesis comports with natural science.
So some of them were not entirely imaginary. Like, for example, the biblical flood was based on an actual flood that happened in the Iraqi floodplain.
But I think
I would argue at the close of the last ice age.
I think we're getting away from the point.
I agree. Sorry for that. I agree.
I mean, it's worthy of discussion, and I do agree with Neslik on this that the Bible does adopt things. I believe almost all mythos has a kernel of truth to it. The things people adopt and then run with it, right? I mean, there are probably stories outright created, no question, but many of the mythos we have handed down, something happened and it got twisted. But anyways, I still want Casey to run this with Wyatt, because it's critical that Wyatt understands that the problem what he's having here, twofold. One, you can't have the Bible as a basis for an axiom if you don't know what the Bible is. And then the other problem is this hypostantiation, where he's actually taking he's actually taking something and making a actually concrete solidification of something, right? He's taking this idea, like in this case Doctor Who or the Daleks, and saying, oh well, you know what, because I can have a syllogism about them, that's true, therefore they are true. I think he's doing the same exact thing, and I don't know how to suss this out with him. And Casey, maybe you can go a little bit further on this, because I mean, I really think this is critical that Wyatt understands what we're saying.
Well, Wyatt, what do you think of all this?
Well, I would actually go internal critique.
Sorry, you cut off a little bit at the beginning. Could you say that again?
I would go for an internal critique instead of an external one.
What do you mean by that?
He wants us to challenge the truth of the Bible, I think, or not?
I think he wants to challenge like our worldview, but that doesn't distract from that just distracts from the fact that we're making valid points to you, and you're just
that's a red herring. That's a red herring. Going on. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
If you guys stop interrupting me, and by the way, I'm being gracious to you guys.
I'm sorry for interrupting. I'm sorry.
You're lagging a little bit, Wyatt.
I'm actually being gracious to you guys for letting you guys interact with me, because this was supposed to be between me and KC, but...
Well, that was 45 minutes, and then you actually had said, you asking him questions, and it wasn't going anywhere. That's why I opened it up.
Okay, sure.
Why don't you tell me what's on your mind? What do you mean by internal versus external criticism?
Well, internal critique is I would let you assume that stuff, and then go on the basis of what can this Doctor Who actually account for? What can this dialectic actually account for?
Well, so far it's accounted for space and for time, and by playing certain word games, maybe even incorporating other things from the lore. From Doctor Who scripts, I can also derive the law of non-contradiction. You used some verses from the Bible to derive law of non-contradiction. Maybe somewhere in Doctor Who, in one of the scripts, they'll say I'll find something that says something along the lines of, there's all this talk about time paradox and so on. So somewhere the law of non-contradiction is bound to show up, not in the formal form, but in the similar kind of, God can't go against himself, the verse, similar poetic, vague kind of thing from which we could derive non-contradiction. I also want to add that there's actually nothing physically necessary about these laws of logic. You remember I was saying earlier about how multiplicative commutivity doesn't necessarily apply in some spheres, how the axioms of geometry don't necessarily apply in some spheres. It's the same with any deductive framework, including logic. So I could derive my own laws of logic from this and say that those laws of logic are better than the ones that you hold to. Yeah.
The law of identity, the law of non-contradiction, the law of the excluded middle. I don't know how all places and all times. Well, probably in quantum physics where. Are you guys still there?
Yes.
Yeah, we're still here. Yeah, no, there are places where those don't always hold. And I think it was diatheism that eliminates, or doesn't have the requirement for a law of excluded middle and law of what's the other one? It has two. I think it's two that it actually doesn't. It doesn't have to have. But as Casey said, there's no real reason for these. I mean, they exist. We think they exist a priori as far as our observation. They've never been violated. I can't think of anything that goes against the law of non-contradiction. But again, I don't need anything else to think that way, right? I can just think.
Well, there are some engineering applications for what they call quantum logic, and this is when a certain proposition simultaneous is a superposition where it has truth values that are mutually contradictory.
Sure.
So this would be a violation of law of non-contradiction, if you're using quantum logic.
That's true. Yeah.
And this isn't just some abstract thing somebody made up. There are actual engineering applications for this kind of thing. So what I'm saying is, these things aren't necessarily absolute. There are situations where they can be suspended and thrown out. It's just like any language. We don't have to talk to each other in English using the rules of English. We can talk to each other in Spanish using the rules of Spanish. We can talk to each other in Russian using the rules of Russian. As long as our frameworks are internally consistent, we'll be able to communicate. And that's the function of logic and mathematics and so on. These things are meant to communicate certain things. They're descriptions of reality, not prescriptions of it.
And describe within a certain system, right? Because what you're saying, Casey, is that in any type of framework, there's going to be violations of something. In other words, there's nothing that holds true across all different types of types of logic. Was it like Gödel's and completeness theorem? If you pick one, then you won't have consistency with somewhere else.
Yeah, I'm not a mathematician, so I know I know a little bit about Gödel's incompleteness theorem, but I've never seen its derivation, and I've never applied it before. So
basically, there's no one size fits all that works for everything.
Yeah.
That's basically the best.
Yeah, that much I know.
Yeah.
Wyatt, what do you make of all this?
Oh man, this is actually going a little bit above my head. Oh man,
you're not alone. You're not alone.
Probably either that or I didn't have my coffee, so I'm still.
I need to make another cup.
Well, the broader problem that I've been trying to raise, and this has sort of been the overriding theme of what I've been trying to say, is that there is a problem of deduction that is parallel to the problem of induction that Hume had found. And the problem of deduction is that it's fundamentally tautological. I can define anything into existence using deduction. I can define the existence of Daleks, I can define the validity of the Bible and God into existence using deduction. But that doesn't necessarily comport with our phenomenal experience of reality. And worse than that. Yeah.
Give an example of a deduction or an induction defining Dalek into existence.
Well, for deduction, you basically do what I did. You define an entity called Dalek, and you assign it these properties, and then you take these properties and you apply a certain set of rules, and you take it to its natural conclusion, starting with a definition.
Can you give your syllogism again? For maybe they missed it. The syllogism that Daleks, hate Time Lords.
Oh, okay. We could do that, or we could do the one where I just defined, I defined space and time, but there's also that. Premise 1, Daleks hate Time Lords. Premise 2, the Doctor is a Time Lord. Conclusion, Daleks hate the Doctor.
Yeah.
It's perfectly valid, and it describes them, but it doesn't mean that they exist. Why?
But is it a sound argument? So validity and soundness is also a different thing, right?
It's sound if you have the definitions.
Well, it's valid. It's valid in this. It's valid because it doesn't commit any logical fallacies. Because the premises actually do lead to the true conclusion. Conclusion is.
Well, he's saying it's not sound because these things don't actually exist.
No. Soundness does not rely on physical mantation.
So they don't have to exist, and it's still a valid and sound syllogism.
Yeah, valid means if an argument is the conclusion logically follows from the premises, and soundness is whether the premises are
true,
valid. True,
right.
yes,
Mm-hmm.
true.
Yeah, it has nothing to do whether they actually exist or not.
Yes. It is true based on the lore of Doctor Who that Daleks hate Time Lords, and also premise 2 that Doctor Who is a Time Lord.
The Doctor is a Time Lord.
Yes.
Yeah.
Based on the lore of the story.
So what he's saying is, it doesn't matter whether you use induction, deduction, or abduction. There's, again, no one size fits all that's going to work. That's why we pick one for science that we find to be the most practical and most useful, right? Wyatt. Mm-hmm. And so when presuppositional argumentation says, well, they try to throw in, this uncertainty. Well, that's not a big deal when it comes to science, because science accepts that there's uncertainty involved. He mentioned earlier the Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, one of the most foundational principles in quantum mechanics. You can't get away from that. And nobody has actually said what it was. It's basically why it's very simple. It just means you cannot know the exact momentum and position of a particle at the same time. That's it.
Yes.
And so when we want to know one, we give up certainty about the other. Like, for example, if I want to know about the position, I lose accuracy or precision about the momentum, and vice versa. So in science, we understand that we're not going to have this absolute certitude that you're looking for, that you're trying to say, well, we can't rely on science because of this. Well, that's exactly what makes science strong, because science recognizes this.
Yeah, but the more powerful argument I'm trying to make, though, is that there is a problem with induction. There's the problem of uncertainty. We can never be guaranteed 100% with absolute certainty that the future is going to resemble the past. Mm-hmm. That we can make statements about the future based on what we've observed. That's not a guarantee. It's always worked so far. But
it is useful to think that the future is going to be like the present and the past.
Well, Casey, how could we even have predictive modeling if we don't have that assumption? If we don't assume that right off the bat, we could even have any kind of predictive modeling, could we?
It's like the opposite of uniformitarianism, of not.
Well, I would say that you make the weak assumption, not the strong assumption. You make the weak assumption that there's no good reason to deny the validity of induction, rather than the strong assumption that induction is valid.
Okay, I would go with that. Sure. There's no reason not to.
And then the entire presuppositional apologetic seems to be an attack upon induction. And the biggest irony is that the entire apologetic piggybacks off of David Hume, who was almost certainly an atheist. the problem is you can't throw in deduction. You can't really throw in this certainty and start defining existence into existence. Because, as I'm trying to say, deduction is fundamentally tautological, regardless of whether it's language, mathematics, chess. All that it requires is internal consistency and and definitions. That's it.
I see the presup are going back and forth
anything-
all the time. Not necessarily Wyatt, but when I hear a lot of these presup arguments, I see them constantly switching between deductive and inductive and deductive and inductive and go back and forth, and they don't seem to really focus on one particular one. Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
I've seen they try to make one big axiom and then they reject any, or they say then, oh, we only have to make this axiom and then no longer have to make any other axiom because God is all the base for everything and so forth.
So Wyatt, which one are you working with right now? Induction? You're going to discuss induction with him or deductive reasoning with KC? The problems with it.
Well, let me just finish making my point. What I'm saying is all of these forms of reasoning are fundamentally flawed. You have to apply them in places where it makes sense. If you apply deduction where you should be applying induction or vice versa, it's like knocking over all the chess pieces and shouting touchdown. Like you basically don't know what you're doing. You have to use the right tools for the right situation.
Does it make sense, Wyatt?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm not all there right now.
No, it's fine. Don't worry about it.
I've maybe a great advice for you if you're interested. Do you know Crash Course Philosophy?
I've watched a few of his videos and I'm impressed, but like I said, my note-taking skills are terrible.
Okay. Well, if we're ready to close, which it kind of sounds like we are.
I want to keep this under 2 hours.
Yeah, I just want to finish by giving a brief historical exposition, detailing on why I think that it's important to remember that deduction and induction have their own separate places, and that it's a very, very bad idea to abuse, in this case, deduction. So the history of Western philosophy is basically characterized by Plato and Aristotle, Socrates, if he was real. But before Socrates, there were a number of pre-Socratics. There was Parmenides, there was Heraclitus, there was Empedocles. And the most important one of these to me was Democritus. Democritus was an atomist. He believed that the universe fundamentally boils down to these constituents that are common to all things.
You mean Democritus?
Yeah, Democritus.
It's a pronunciation. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry about that. What set Democritus apart from all of these other philosophers was that his reasoning was fundamentally inductive. The rest of these guys, they kind of sat around in armchairs and dreamed things up. In the case of Pythagoras, he was like looking at triangles and all of these other geometric figures, and he was deducing theorems from them, which was good and useful, but that was still a form of deduction. Whereas Democritus, he was actually, he was a sort of proto-empiricist. He was doing like basic experiments. It was very earthy. He didn't really have his head up in the clouds, And Plato hated him. And Plato, of course, was the student of Socrates, and Socrates, he was the one who drank the hemlock. He was the one who became the martyr. He basically became philosophy Jesus, and so Western philosophy from then on took the course of Plato and Socrates.
But wasn't Plato? Didn't Plato came up with the 4 elements, the classical elements like water, earth, fire, and wind, or not?
It might have been Aristotle. I don't remember.
The Platonic solids, right, or not?
There are Platonic solids.
Yeah. Isn't that from Plato, Platonic or not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, Democritus's way of sort of looking at things and writing them down, that was picked up on by Aristotle. He was a bit of an improvement over Plato in that sense, but still, for the most part, Western philosophy for the next 15, 16, 1700 years, or that was 15 or 1600 years, was entirely deductive. It was all about, starting with these initial assumptions. The Platonics, the people who were more closer to Plato's school, they began with this sort of ontology about what actually exists and what can be known about it. The Aristotelians was a little bit different, but it was still basically fundamentally deductive. Then in the 1500s, we had Francis Bacon come along, and he published Novum Organum. And for the first time since Democritus, we had a philosophy that started advocating induction rather than deduction. And from then on, we had the scientific revolution and the standard of living, our capacity, our lifespans, the percentage of the world that gets fed, the eradication of smallpox, and the curing and vaccination of diseases. All of these things developed only after our civilization started applying induction. The moral of the story I'm trying to say is that over-reliance on deduction historically and contemporarily does not lead to good results. You have to remember that deduction is used primarily to develop systems that allow us to communicate rather than to make descriptions about the world as it is. If you want to describe the world that we all experience, you have to use induction. Yeah.
And that's like the four elements, the classical four elements was Empedocles, but Aristotle added aether theory, right?
Yeah.
That's
what
it was. So,
yes.
Yeah. Which, by the way, one of these days we'll have to get KC in here. I would love to have a discussion with him on what this resurgence of aether theorists have been lately, because I've noticed a few of them out there, and I don't know why they keep on trying to bring back aether and get rid of special relativity. I'd love to have a hangout on that one of these days with maybe General and a few other people.
Yeah, it's a little bit disconcerting, because the last time this was a big deal was in Nazi Germany with Deutsche Physics, trying to overthrow the Jewish lies, they called it.
What was the other one? The Russians. You just did a video on it. Oh my goodness.
Lysenkoism?
Lysenkoism. Yeah, I mean that there seems to be it's like you said, a neo version of that, and I'm wondering, where is all this coming from? Is it something that's a byproduct of YouTube? Is it a byproduct of the internet? It's kind of scary, actually.
I think we always had crazy people because of the internet and the age of communication. They find each other.
Finding each other.
And they breed.
That's true. I believe that. I think you're right, actually. Never in my wildest dreams would I think there'd be a medium where you'd find so diverse, crazy people all kind of like finding each other, going, "Hey, I'm just as messed up as you.
Let's hang out."
Yeah. But anyways, I want to wrap this up a little bit. Casey, I think that was kind of your closing for the most part. Wyatt, do you want some equal time to kind of respond to that? And by the way, I am going to have something after this. I don't know who's going to stick around. There's going to be a new video. But I really want to address some of the points that we couldn't get into, because I think we had a brilliant thing on the axiom. Why his axiom is prior to existence of him knowing that the Bible existed. Right before he had that knowledge, I don't know what his axiom was. I don't think that ever got sussed out, and I think that has to be something we focus on, because you can't say the Bible is an axiom if you don't know the Bible exists at that point, right? But prior to that, you have to have an axiom even prior to that, right? But anyway, I've got to answer the doorbell here online. So go ahead, Wyatt.
Sure, it was a good conversation. I would like to have another one with. Hopefully, just me and KC, and
that'd be awesome.
Just me and KC, and maybe even a moderator if we decide to do something a little bit more formal. I don't know.
I'm sorry I butted in. Sorry for that.
but yeah, if we could do something a little bit more formal, and Casey, if you want to do some videos that I could actually look into and for a next discussion, because I wasn't really up to par because I was searching through like what is KC going to say.
Yeah. When it comes to the whole God debate, I don't really make videos about it anymore. These days, I'm focused more on other. Well,
do you have another quantum one coming out soon?
Yeah, I'm working on Quantum 3 right now.
Yeah.
It's,
by the way, if you haven't watched those, Wyatt, watch them. They're brilliant. I mean,
Casey, I've been waiting patiently for your third one.
Yeah, get it done, man. What are you wasting time with us for? Finish that shit.
I'm sorry.
But anyways, so Wyatt, you kind of want to wrap it up. I'm gonna end this particular hangout in a few minutes.
Can I ask?
Everybody get their last words in.
Yeah.
But like I said, we'll be having another hangout afterwards, in about 5 minutes afterwards. And Paul, we didn't get you in, by the way. Sorry. Is there something you want to add after next? Go, you can.
We'll talk in the next chat.
Done. All right, next, go ahead.
I want to ask KC a question. Are you familiar with the YouTube channel PBS Spacetime?
No.
Oh, all right. They have some pretty interesting stuff, and I want to ask if they were accurate with their representation of quantum mechanics.
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
All right, with that though, yeah, we look forward to his 3. If you guys haven't seen his first 2, go watch it on King Crocoduck's channel. Right. But Wyatt, hey, you know what? Thank you for coming in, and yeah, I know. I mean, you said you wanted to keep this short, right? So you wanted to keep it under an hour. That's why about 45, 50 minutes in, I opened it up because it wasn't really going anywhere. So you did have ample opportunity if you go back and review the footage that you did have an ample opportunity to discuss things with Casey. But anyways, Casey, thank you for joining us. I don't know if you're going to stick around for the after, but at least you and Wyatt had a chance to talk. We'll arrange something a little bit more, maybe next weekend or something. Does that sound good?
Sure.
Sure.
I know you got a lot going on right now. Are you out of school right now, Casey? I mean, you finished everything?
I'm on break right now, quote unquote break. I'm preparing actually. I'm going to start teaching students for the first time this upcoming semester. It's going to be cool.
If you guys want to see some crazy stuff, man, he showed me some of the stuff he was working on. I didn't even know what the symbols meant. I mean, it's just this mind-boggling. That advanced courses he's taking, so I'm humbled that your brain actually can actually interpret that stuff. Because I took a lot of physics courses and I was just lost in that.
I couldn't interpret that stuff. That's why I needed help.
Well, you at least got it done. But anyways, guys, thanks a lot. I'm gonna have another hang on about 5-10 minutes. I'm just gonna let this feed die. After I stop it, I got to wait for you to so I don't just continue the broadcast. So anyways, thank you very much for watching. As always, thank you for your patronage and your support for my channel. It's been great, and I will start another one up in a few minutes. Thanks.